nobody ever came to the sites with a clear idea of what they were searching for.
It's an entrance. We can see an entrance. We have uncovered so many important structures.
What if the most powerful woman in ancient history was not who history promised? Not the beauty, not the goddess, not the seductress who bent Rome to her will through charm alone. What if she was something far more complicated and far more human? In 2025, DNA analysis of bones connected to Cleopatra's bloodline produced results that stopped scientists cold. The skeleton that was supposed to reveal her genetic identity turned out to belong to someone completely different, someone unexpected, someone whose existence raises questions that have no clean answers. And while that mystery sits unsolved in a university archive, 30 feet underground in Egypt, a tunnel nearly a mile long is pointing directly toward the truth. Cleopatra's real story is not about beauty or seduction. It is about survival, genetics, and a dynasty that was quietly collapsing from the inside out for 300 years before she ever took the throne. In 2002, a woman walked into the Egyptian desert with a theory that almost every expert in the world had already rejected. Her name was Kathleen Martinez. She was not a career archaeologist. She had no university dig record behind her name. She was a criminal lawyer from the Dominican Republic who had spent years studying Cleopatra the same way a detective studies a cold case. She looked at the evidence differently. While mainstream historians pointed to Alexandria, insisting the queen's tomb had been swallowed by earthquakes and rising seas centuries ago, Martinez looked at the psychology of the suspect. She asked one question nobody else had thought to ask. If you were Cleopatra, where would you hide? Not where would a queen be buried. Where would this queen hide? A woman who had watched Rome dismantle everything around her. A woman who had seen her own siblings eliminated. A woman who knew that losing to Octavian meant being paraded through Rome in chains, a trophy for the crowd. That kind of woman does not choose a conventional tomb. Martinez followed that logic 30 miles west of Alexandria to a crumbling temple complex sitting at the edge of the desert. Taposiris Magna, a site dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of the dead, and to Isis, the goddess Cleopatra had publicly claimed to be her divine identity. Most experts dismissed her immediately. She kept digging anyway. For 20 years, she worked that site, season after season. And then in 2022, the ground beneath her team shifted. The radar hit something massive, something deep, something that had no business being there. And when they broke through the limestone floor, what they found was not just unexpected. It was an engineering mystery that pointed directly at a queen who did not want to be found. Picture this, 40 feet below the surface, salted bedrock on every side. The air has moved in 2,000 years. And stretching out in front of you, a tunnel, hand-carved, 6 feet high, running for over 4,300 feet in a straight, precise line directly toward the Mediterranean Sea. This was not a drainage ditch. This was not a collapsed foundation. Architects who studied the structure used one specific phrase to describe it, a geometric miracle. The precision of the carving matches the engineering of the ancient Greek tunnel of Eupalinos, one of the most celebrated construction achievements of the ancient world. To replicate that design, in secret, 40 feet underground, through unstable limestone, required planning, resources, and a reason powerful enough to justify the risk. And that raises the first real question. Who builds something like this? And why? You do not carve a mile of bedrock for a minor site. The scale of this construction implies something of massive importance was meant to be protected at the end of it. Then the team looked offshore. Sonar mapping revealed the submerged remains of an ancient port sitting just off the coast, directly in line with the tunnel's trajectory. Taposiris Magna was not a remote desert outpost. It was a hub, a connected, functioning complex with land access, sea access, and now, an underground passage linking them. But the tunnel was not the most disturbing discovery at the site, because when the archaeologists moved deeper into the complex, they found the dead, and what was inside their mouths changed the entire direction of the investigation. 16 tombs, cut directly into the rock, sealed for centuries. When the archaeologists opened them, they did not find treasure. They found bodies, mummies wrapped in linen, their faces collapsed by time. But when they leaned in closer, something glinted in the darkness. Gold inside the mouths of the dead, where their tongues should have been, were thin amulets made of gold foil. In ancient Egyptian belief, the afterlife was not automatic. You had to plead your case. You had to stand before Osiris, the god of the underworld, and speak. You had to justify your existence, convince him you deserved to pass through. But if your tongue had decayed, you had no voice. A golden tongue solves that problem. It gives you what the Egyptians called golden eloquence, the power to speak in the world of the dead. So why are they here? These were not random burials, the positioning of the tombs, the deliberate placement near the tunnel entrance, the fact that every single one of them was equipped with the ability to speak to a god. Martinez believes these were not commoners. They were Cleopatra's people, her court, her inner circle, and they were not just buried here. They were waiting to announce the arrival of someone far more important than themselves. If the courtiers are positioned at the entrance, the queen is somewhere beyond them. But before we open that door, we need to talk about the one person who could have given us her DNA years ago. Her sister, her rival, and the victim of a political assassination so brutal, it shocked the ancient world. Her name was Arsinoe IV. She was Cleopatra's younger sister. And for a brief moment in history, she was her biggest threat. When Cleopatra was forced into exile, it was Arsinoe who seized the throne. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt with his legions, it was Arsinoe who led the army against him. She was 15 years old, and she nearly won. She managed to trap Caesar inside the palace walls. Roman soldiers, some of the best trained fighters in the world, were pinned down by an Egyptian force commanded by a teenage girl. History does not talk about that part very often. Caesar eventually broke the siege. Arsinoe was captured, and instead of being executed on the spot, she was dragged to Rome in chains and paraded through the streets as a trophy. The Roman crowds were supposed to cheer. They were supposed to celebrate another barbarian brought to heel. But they did not. They wept. A 15-year-old girl, shackled, humiliated, marched like an animal in front of thousands. The public outcry was so strong that Caesar spared her life. He exiled her instead to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus in what is now Turkey, sacred ground. A place where no blood could be spilled. She thought she was safe. For years, she was. And then in 41 BCE, Cleopatra made a request to her new Roman ally, Mark Antony. She wanted her sister gone. Antony sent assassins to the temple steps. They dragged Arsinoe out of the sanctuary and killed her in full view of the priests. It was a scandal that echoed across the Mediterranean. Killing someone on holy ground was unthinkable. But it also gave archaeologists something they desperately needed 2,000 years later: a location. They knew exactly where the murder happened, which meant they knew where to look for the body. And in the 1990s, they found a tomb, a prestigious burial structure called the Octagon. Inside was a skeleton, young, female, the right age, the right time period. If this was Arsinoe, science could finally decode Cleopatra's DNA. But science had other plans. For years, the skeleton in Ephesus sat in storage, handled, measured, photographed. Everyone believed it was Arsinoe, the sister, the key to Cleopatra's bloodline. But early DNA tests failed. Too much contamination. Too many hands touching the bones over decades of study. Then in 2022, a team from the University of Vienna relocated the skull. It had been sitting in the university archives, forgotten for years. This time, they did not just look at it, they looked through it. Using micro-CT scans, they created a digital map of the bone structure at microscopic resolution. Then they drilled into the petrous temporal bone, the densest part of the skull, the biological vault, the one place where DNA survives even when the rest of the skeleton has turned to dust. In January 2025, the results were published, and they were not what anyone expected. The skeleton was not a 20-year-old woman, it was a boy. Between 11 and 14 years old, the DNA showed a Y chromosome, male no question. But it got worse. The scans revealed severe developmental disorders. The skull was asymmetrical, twisted. The jaw was stunted and malformed. The bone structure pointed to something like Treacher-Collins syndrome, a genetic condition that deforms the face during development. This was not a healthy royal rival. This was a child who had suffered. and his DNA did not trace back to Egypt. It traced to Italy or Sardinia. So now questions multiply. Why is a deformed Italian boy buried in one of the most prestigious tombs in the ancient world? Why was he given a hero's burial, reserved for semi-divine figures, in a foreign land? Was he a hidden child? A political secret? A sacrifice? The skeleton that was supposed to unlock Cleopatra's genetic code was not her sister at all. It was someone else entirely, and nobody knows who, which means the search for Cleopatra's DNA is back to zero. But the genetic horror story does not end there, because the real nightmare was not hiding in a tomb in Turkey. It was hiding in plain sight, in Alexandria. In the family tree Cleopatra climbed to reach the throne, and that tree does not branch out. It collapses in on itself. In a normal family tree, the branches expand. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. The further back you go, the wider the tree spreads. But Cleopatra's family tree does not expand. It collapses. The Ptolemies were a Greek dynasty ruling Egypt. They wanted absolute power, and they wanted to keep that power inside the family. So they adopted a strategy that had been used by the pharaohs before them. They married each other, not distant cousins, not arranged political matches across kingdoms, siblings, uncles and nieces, parents who were also relatives several times over. Cleopatra's own mother and father, Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra V, were most likely full siblings. Her grandparents may have been uncle and niece, maybe even brother and sister. This was not an accident, it was policy. Geneticists who have studied the Ptolemaic bloodline estimate that Cleopatra was born with a coefficient of inbreeding over 45%. To put that in perspective, the child of 2 first cousins has about a 6% coefficient. Cleopatra's number was nearly 8 times higher. For comparison, Charles II of Spain, the last of the Habsburg line, had a coefficient around 25%, and he was a medical disaster. He could not speak until he was 4. He could not walk until he was 8. His jaw was so deformed that his teeth did not touch. He could not chew food. He had to swallow everything whole. When he died at 38, the autopsy said his body contained almost no blood. His heart was the size of a peppercorn. Cleopatra's inbreeding coefficient was nearly double his. So here is the science. Normally, your DNA is a conversation. Your mother passes down one set of genes. Your father passes down another. If your mother's gene carries a flaw, your father's gene usually covers it. That is the safety net. But when your parents are siblings, there is no safety net. The same flaws repeat. The same errors get copied. The recessive genes that should stay hidden come to the surface. The result is called homozygosity. It is when both copies of a gene are identical. And when those identical genes carry the same genetic damage, there is nothing to stop it. Biologically, Cleopatra should have been a catastrophe. Inbreeding at this level usually results in deformities, cognitive issues, weak immune systems, short lifespans. But history tells us she was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages. She commanded armies. She seduced the most powerful men in Rome. So how is that possible? Maybe she was a genetic miracle, 1 in a million. Or maybe she was not as healthy as history made her look. Maybe what we call genius was actually something else. To understand what Cleopatra was fighting against, you have to look at the man who came before her, Ptolemy VIII. He was her great-granduncle, but in a family tree that goes in circles, he is also her direct genetic mirror. History remembers him as a monster. They called him Physcon. It translates to potbelly, but that was the polite version. Historical records describe him as morbidly obese. His limbs were too weak to support his massive frame. He could barely walk. But look closer at the description. It was not just fat. He had a swollen neck, prominent, bulging eyes, shortness of breath even when he was resting. Medical historians looking at the Ptolemaic line today see a clear pattern. They see a family plagued by obesity and lethargy, and most terrifying of all, they see the markers of Graves' disease. This is an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid gland. It causes a goiter, that swollen neck. It pushes the eyes forward, it creates a restless, trembling body, and it does something else that sounds very familiar. It floods the body with thyroid hormones. It puts the human system into a state of hyperstimulation. The symptoms are distinct. Manic energy, rapid speech, insomnia, erratic, high-stakes behavior, a mind that never stops. Does that sound familiar? Ancient texts praise Cleopatra for her boundless vitality. She could work all night, sleep for an hour, and work again. She was constantly on the move. She was charismatic, then aggressive, then commanding. We have always framed that as the trait of a genius ruler. But medical anthropologists are asking a darker question. Was it brilliance, or was it a symptom? Was the fire inside her actually a thyroid storm passed down through the bloodline? A biological engine running too hot? If she was vibrating with manic energy and chronic pain, she would have needed a way to manage it. She would have needed something to take the edge off. And she had access to something Rome had never seen before. She had the pharmacy of Egypt. If Cleopatra was fighting a war against her own DNA, she needed weapons. And Rome had nothing like them. Egypt was the pharmaceutical capital of the ancient world. If she was suffering from the joint and bone agony that plagued other inbred dynasties, she had access to opium. It was harvested from the poppy fields of Thebes. It was the ultimate painkiller of the era. She could have used it to numb the pain in her genetically compromised joints, to stand tall, to walk straight, to endure endless diplomatic receptions without collapsing. But the physical pain was only half the battle. If she was suffering from the mania and insomnia of Graves' disease, she needed something to bring her down. She had Kaifi. This was a complex temple incense, not just a scent. Plutarch, the ancient historian, wrote that its smell lulled one to sleep and loosened the daily tension like a knot. For a woman vibrating with hyperactive energy, Kaifi was not just perfume. It was a sedative. It was medicine. And then there is the blue lotus. This flower was often steeped in wine. We talk about Cleopatra's legendary charisma, her magnetic presence. But modern studies show that the blue lotus contains alkaloids that affect dopamine. It creates a mild sense of euphoria, a floating feeling. Was her personality natural? Or was it a delicate cocktail of blue lotus wine and adrenaline? She was not just using drugs to feel good. She was using them to function. We know Cleopatra wrote a book on cosmetics called Cosmeticon. Later, doctors like Galen actually quoted her recipes. She was not just buying makeup, she was researching it, mixing it. Why? If she had inherited the potbelly genes, or if Graves' disease gave her a swollen neck or bulging eyes, her obsession with cosmetics was not vanity. It was camouflage. She used thick powders, elaborate broad collars, strategic jewelry. She was arguably the world's first biohacker. A brilliant woman trapped in a failing body, using chemistry and botany to paint a lie over her face. She engineered her own image with the same precision she used to engineer political alliances. But underneath every mask, there is a real face, and that face may still be waiting underground. Deep underground, the air is thick, suffocating. For 2,000 years, the sand of Egypt has held onto a silence that refuses to break. But Kathleen Martinez is now closer than anyone in history to shattering it. She has found the tunnel. She has found the court. She has found the golden tongues waiting to speak. All that remains is the final seal. Above ground, the advanced technology sits waiting. DNA sequencers, ground-penetrating radar units. These are the modern keys designed to unlock a door that has been bolted shut for over 2 millennia. They are hungry. They are ready to analyze even the faintest trace of royal lineage. But we have to prepare ourselves, because the reality waiting inside that sarcophagus is not the romantic tragedy we expect. When we started this journey, we were looking for a legend. The seductress played by Hollywood stars, the beauty who charmed an empire, the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. But science tells us to prepare for something else. If Martinez breaks through that final wall and finds the tomb, she will not uncover a queen. She will uncover a medical archive. She might find a woman who is petite, frail, hiding agonizing pain behind a mask of gold and linen. She might find a woman who looked less like a movie star and more like a survivor. A woman who fought a war against Rome with her mind, while fighting a war against her own DNA with her pharmacy. A master strategist who eliminated siblings, terrified generals, and held an empire together for 20 years, while her own body was slowly trying to tear itself apart. Finding Cleopatra will not just rewrite history books. It will rewrite biology textbooks. It will finally answer the question, was she the genetic miracle who escaped the curse? Or was she the silent sufferer who ruled in spite of it? And what about that deformed Italian boy buried in Ephesus? Was he a scapegoat? A sacrifice? Or was he a secret royal child whose existence was so dangerous that it had to be erased? The silence down there is only temporary. As technology advances, the gap between the legend and the hard evidence narrows. We are not just hunting for a beautiful queen. We are hunting for a ruthless political survivor who refused to die. And when that tomb is finally breached, we will not just be looking at a face. We will be looking directly at the raw, terrifying cost of absolute power. So, if they open the tomb tomorrow and find out Cleopatra looked like a monster, do we burn the history books, or does that make her even more impressive? The dirt is shifting. The radar is beeping. The ghost of the last pharaoh is still guarding her secrets, but she cannot hide forever.